The courtroom was unusually quiet that day, almost unnaturally so. The only sounds were the rhythmic tapping of the judge's gavel and the heavy silence that lingered between two former lovers. On one side sat Jessica Morgan, a high-profile attorney known for dismantling her opponents with cold precision. She had built a reputation that made even seasoned lawyers nervous. Yet today, she wasn't here to defend a client. She was the one on trial. The accusation obstructing a father's right to be present in his son's life. Across from her sat Andrew, soft-spoken, silver-haired, and calm. He said nothing as he gently placed an old, tattered teddy bear on the courtroom table. It looked like nothing more than a worn childhood keepsake. But then the video began to play footage from a micro camera hidden inside the toy. The silence cracked. What followed stunned everyone in the room. Jessica's voice, cold and calculated, could be heard coaching her 10-year-old son. Not in love, not in kindness, but in manipulation. Her words painted a chilling picture of a mother quietly orchestrating her son's rejection of his father, poisoning the bond between them with carefully chosen lies. There was no need for debate. No legal defense could undo what the footage revealed, because the damning evidence came from Jessica herself. Without a word, the judge reached for the phone and called the police. Moments later, Jessica Morgan, once feared in every courtroom she entered, was handcuffed before the eyes of her own child. And the boy, too young to understand the weight of the truth, could only cry in silence, wondering why the mother, who always said she loved him, never let him love his father. They were once New York's golden power couple in the legal world. Jessica Morgan, brilliant and razor-sharp, famously nicknamed the Queen of Cold Negotiation, and Andrew Blake, a family law specialist, known for his gentle patience and unwavering belief that children must always come first in any divorce. They fell in love during law school, married after 3 years working together at a prestigious firm, and seemed destined for greatness. But everything collapsed the night Jessica returned from a major lawsuit, drunk, exhausted, and coldly said, "I never imagined I'd spend my life with someone as boring as you." Andrew said nothing. He didn't storm out. He simply packed his things the next morning quietly, leaving behind a handwritten letter and a single message. "When you're ready to show our child what true, uninhibited love looks like, call me." They divorced peacefully, at least on paper. Jessica was awarded full custody. Andrew, like many fathers in similar cases, was granted weekend visitation rights. But a few months later, his scheduled visits started getting canceled without warning. The excuses were always the same. "He's caught a cold. He doesn't want to go. He has an extra class today. I can't bring him." Andrew would stand waiting in the rain while Jessica kept her professional poise in court. Meanwhile, their son grew quieter. He started to lie more often, taught by his mother that, "If you don't want to make Daddy sad, just don't tell him anything." Eventually, Andrew made a decision. He placed a tiny hidden camera inside the stuffed bear his son always brought home after those canceled visits. It was a rainy Monday morning at the Brooklyn family court. Andrew sat on the plaintiff's side, his hair slightly damp after waiting outside the courthouse for over 30 minutes. His son never arrived. Across the room, Jessica appeared in a light gray suit, looking like she had just stepped out of a press conference, poised, expressionless, unapologetic. Andrew's attorney requested permission to present new evidence. A small, unremarkable USB drive was inserted into the courtroom projector. The screen lit up with footage from the hidden camera sewn into a stuffed bear named Mr. Rocket, a toy their son always clung to when returning from Jessica's home. The first voice wasn't a child's, but Jessica's, sharp and cold. "Don't tell your father. If he asks, just say Mom is tired." The screen showed their son, around 6 years old, sitting quietly on the sofa, eyes cast downward. Jessica's voice continued, "Do you want Daddy to fight for custody, if not be good? Stay with Mommy only." The room went silent. One of Jessica's attorneys started to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Let the video play." The next scene was even heavier. Jessica grabbed the phone out of her son's hands as he was typing the message, "Daddy, I miss you." She deleted it, threw the phone onto the floor, then leaned in and whispered just loud enough for the camera to catch her lips. "Don't make me do anything worse, okay?" Andrew lowered his head. When he looked back up, there were no more tears in his eyes. They were steel. The judge looked at both of them and calmly delivered a sentence that no one in the courtroom would ever forget. Some mothers ought to relearn how to be human before they try to teach others how to be a mother. The atmosphere in the courtroom was so heavy that the sound of a pen signing paper could be clearly heard. The judge declared firmly, "This court temporarily transfers custody of the child to the father, Mr. Andrew Mitchell. The defendant, Jessica Monroe, is hereby accused of violating the custody agreement and of engaging in psychological manipulation of a minor." Jessica stood frozen. Her lips tightened slightly, but no words escaped. Two security officers approached, no handcuffs, no shouting. Yet their eyes made it clear this was no longer just a family matter. Outside, a small group of reporters had been waiting. Someone raised a camera as Jessica stepped out, her shoulders trembling not from the cold, but from the unfamiliar sensation of losing control for the first time in her life. Andrew didn't leave the courtroom right away. Instead, he walked to a corner of the room where a man had been standing silently since the beginning of the session, Jessica's father. "I know you once told her not to go through with this." Andrew said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you. For at least being someone in her family who still has a conscience." The older man said nothing. He simply bowed his head deeply. In his eyes was something resembling regret, the kind that only a helpless father would understand. In the adjacent children's waiting room, a young boy stood by the window and saw his father smiling at him for the first time in many months. The boy raised his hand to the glass. Andrew did the same. Two hands, one big, one small, met through the pane wordlessly. No one said it, but everyone in that moment understood the first consequence is not always a sentence. Sometimes it is the realization of how many hugs were missed, simply because one placed too much faith in the silence of the law. The court session had concluded. But in a quiet room away from the main courtroom, an internal document was being copied and stored. It was a report from a social worker who had been assigned to monitor the case from the beginning. No one had known she had quietly gathered every overlooked detail: the mother's misleading testimony, the video clip of the child being forced to call his father a stranger, and even the history of counseling appointments Jessica had canceled without informing the court. On the folder's cover, a handwritten note read, "Signs of post-divorce parental alienation. Recommend evaluation as prolonged emotional abuse." Yet that report was never added to the official case file. Why? Because there is no legal provision that requires courts to consider this behavior as a criminal act. It exists in a gray zone of law where victims bear no visible bruises but are scarred for life. Mr. Matthews, the attorney representing the father, once sighed during a conversation with a court officer. "Being a father is not just about being present," he said. "It's about being allowed to be present. And today's legal system doesn't always side with those who want that." In the courthouse's basement archives, where sealed cases lie like unopened caskets, there are hundreds of such stories of parents who only wanted a place in their children's memories, but were erased by a court order, and a former partner who now uses the law as a weapon. The law is not wrong. But sometimes it is so rigidly right that it forgets how to be human. After the verdict was delivered, the story of the father, the central figure in the custody case, quickly spread across social media. But what no one expected was that he was not alone. Hundreds of messages began pouring in from fathers across the United States. One had driven 200 miles every week just to see his child for 10 minutes through a glass window. Another had been falsely accused, lost his job, but kept every letter his child ever wrote as proof for the day they were old enough to understand. There were even those who had never won a case, but had also never stopped loving. They came together to form a group called Right to Hold, the right to hold one's child. It wasn't a large organization, had no sponsors, no media coverage. It was simply a collective of fathers and mothers who had once been pushed aside and now chose to speak their truth. One member of the group, Miguel Torres, a Mexican-American mechanic, once shared a short video. In it, he said, "I don't need to win in court. I just need my child to know that one day I stood in the rain at the school gate waiting, just hoping they'd look back." That line struck a chord with many, especially those who had once believed that fathers were meant to be stoic, distant, or somehow lesser in the eyes of the law. True love needs no justification. These people didn't fight with weapons, nor did they respond with anger. They chose silent resistance, steady and unyielding, just like the father at the heart of the case had done for 2 long years of being denied. He recorded every day his child was absent, wrote diary entries addressed to the child who might never read them, and walked into court knowing he could lose but showing up anyway. Because to them, loving their children was not a privilege to be pitied. It was a right. Throughout the custody battle, everyone spoke on behalf of the child. The mother said the child needed stability. The lawyer argued the child was too young to understand. The court insisted the child should not be drawn into adult conflict. But no one asked the child a simple question. "Do you miss your dad?" The child, only 8 years old, became a report written by others. No one noticed how every night the child would quietly hide a drawing under the pillow, an image of 2 hands, one big and one small, holding each other. The other hand was left empty. No one knew that while the mother was in court demanding her independence, all the child truly wanted was one afternoon eating ice cream with Dad like before. While people debated who was right and who was wrong, while the law imposed visitation schedules, while adults replaced the word responsibility with rights, the child gradually learned to stay silent. Not because they didn't know how to speak, but because they were afraid that speaking up would become another reason for Dad to be scolded or Mom to cry. The child became so quiet that everyone assumed they were fine, so well behaved that the lawyer didn't feel the need to ask more questions. And that silence became an invisible sentence, one not recorded in any file or document, yet one that would follow the child for the rest of their life. Because the most painful part isn't the separation of parents, but that no one asked where the child wanted to be when both parents were pulling in opposite directions. He didn't win the case. The court ruled that the mother would have full custody. The father was granted indirect communication rights. That meant if he was lucky, he could send a birthday card. If the mother agreed, the child might read it. But in the first year, he didn't send anything. He showed up in person. He stood more than 50 steps away from the front gate holding a cardboard box wrapped in old cartoon-themed paper. He waited for 3 hours before quietly leaving. No one opened the door. Still, he came again. In the second year, he brought a comic book, the kind he used to read to his child when they were little. No one came out. But a curtain moved slightly, and he saw a pair of small, quiet eyes behind the window on the second floor. In the third year, he brought a cake with only 3 words written on it. Dad still remembers. He didn't write a name, didn't knock, didn't cause a scene. He simply left it there like a delivery man, expecting no reply. A man who knew that some forms of love don't need to win, only not to give up. And then in the 4th year, something strange happened. The cake left at the gate disappeared after just 10 minutes. No note, no photo. But the next day, on a drawing taped to the second-floor window, there was a scribbled message. Next year, bring strawberry-flavored Dad. The one who lost the case kept coming back. Not because he lacked pride, but because he understood that real love is never absent for too long. The mother stepped out of the courtroom like a victor. She had won everything: custody of her son, the right to deny visits, the right to start over free from the ties of her ex-husband, whom she deemed terrible. She believed that with her son living with her every day, hearing her voice every night, and eating the meals she cooked every morning, his heart would naturally belong to her. But she overlooked one thing: her son always kept the nameless cakes hidden in his desk drawer. He quietly collected comic books, carefully taped, and tucked them away in his toy suitcase. He never called out Dad aloud, yet he always left an empty space to the left of him at the dinner table. Then, one rainy afternoon, she caught him sitting by the window, carefully writing something on an envelope. The child's handwriting was shaky, but clear to Dad. "I still like strawberry flavor." The mother fell silent. In that moment, she felt like the woman holding the winner's hand on the courtroom stage, but standing alone in an empty auditorium. She once thought love could be won by decree. But a child's heart is given through memories no one can force. She opened her phone, dialed his number, then stopped just to look at the familiar name that appeared: Ben's dad. She deleted it and sent only one message: "If you come this year, bring strawberry cake." And that was when the ultimate winner finally understood love is not found in the custody papers, but in the eyes of a child when they turn around and call the one they long for by name. Sunday afternoons in the park were rarely this quiet. Bare trees cast long shadows on the worn concrete, and a gentle breeze stirred the faded grass. The man sat on a stone bench, awkwardly holding a cheap hot chocolate he had bought, just because he knew his son didn't like tea or coffee. The boy sat a few meters away, eyes fixed on the lake legs swinging. A small distance, yet no court ruling could come between them now. No lawyers, no supervisors, no mother's harsh tone, no family court judgment. Just 2 people, one once deemed unfit to raise a child, and a boy who had often heard adults say he doesn't need a father like that. The man said nothing, having learned after countless disputes that silence was sometimes the only way to let a child come close. The boy turned, gripping the strap of his backpack tightly, and spoke softly but firmly. "Dad, I drew this for you." The man froze. He took the paper, a scribbled crayon drawing of a man wearing a hat, smiling slightly crooked, standing beside a boy with buck teeth holding a balloon. No court could issue a verdict in that moment. No lawyer needed to certify this love as real or fake. Only a child's heart, finally choosing to call the right person Dad without being forced. The man whose hands had trembled for years without holding his son smiled with tears falling into his salty hot chocolate. Late afternoon sunlight quietly spread golden streaks across the park bench. The man still sat there beside the boy who was nibbling on a sandwich he had made that morning, wrapped carefully in foil as if it were a meal from a restaurant. The atmosphere was no longer tense like their previous meetings. No more questions of, "What did Mom say?" or "Are you okay?" They simply sat quietly like 2 old friends who needed no words. The boy looked up at the man, his eyes innocent but carrying a weight beyond his years. "Dad," he began. "Yes, if I said..." I didn't want to go home, would that be okay? The man froze. His hand holding the water bottle trembled slightly. He looked at his son not with joy for being chosen, but with a deep fear rising from the depths of his mind. He understood that when a child says such a thing, it means something behind that closed door is breaking something no one wants to see. Is someone making you sad? The boy didn't answer. He just lowered his head, touching the cold bread with his fingertip lips pressed tight. I'm scared if Mom knows I said that she'll be very angry. But being with you feels lighter. I don't have to pretend to be happy, be perfect, or remember what to say. The man slowly placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, not pressing just enough to let him know he was there. It's okay. You can always be honest with me. Here you can be yourself. The boy looked up. The wind tousled his hair, but his eyes were those of someone daring for the first time to speak his true feelings, even though no one had taught him that real emotions are not a fault. When the clock showed 5:58 p.m., almost time to take him home as ordered by the court, the man didn't rush. He quietly tidied up, helped the boy put on his jacket, then held his hand a long time, as if to say all the words he was not allowed to write in the custody papers. And when the boy's mother's car arrived, the child said nothing. But before opening the door, he turned back and whispered, "Dad, when can I stay with you one more day?" That single question was enough for the man to know that all his years of struggle, though called a failure, had never been meaningless. There was no court summons, no notification from a lawyer, no official visitation schedule marked in red on a wall calendar. It was just a gloomy Friday afternoon with misty rain blurring the park near the elementary school. The man stood there as every week, not out of obligation, but from a quiet habit that had become a vow to himself. Even if not called, he would still come. He carried no gifts. He wore no formal clothes like in court. Just an old jacket with a faint smell of tobacco, slightly worn shoes, and eyes no longer hopeful, only holding a place for a sad determination. And then the boy ran toward him. Not walking slowly as usual, no longer looking around to see if anyone was watching, no hesitation. Running. Like a child who only needs to know that place is safe, that it can be called home even without a roof or a court order. The man bent down to catch his son, and for the first time he didn't see any hesitation in the boy's hug. The tight, brief, choked embrace seemed to say only one thing: I made it. Did you run away? He asked softly, gently running his hand through the boy's wet hair. The boy shook his head. I walked. On my own. I don't want to be called a traitor anymore. I don't want to be scolded for saying Dad's name. I don't want to have to tear up the drawings with Dad in them. The man hugged him tightly. You know I'd get in trouble if I kept you today, right? The boy nodded. But if I don't run today, when will I ever be myself? A 7-year-old child, but the question sounded like it came from a soul weary of having to keep the peace in battles he never started. That afternoon, they didn't go home to anyone. They just sat under the bus stop shelter sharing an egg sandwich and a can of yogurt. That bus stop had no sign, no legal guarantee, no lawyer to witness. There was only one thing that was real: the boy had chosen, not with words, but with actions and a courage beyond his years. And the man understood this was not a victory, but proof that love, even when stripped of rights, can still be recognized. The letter was folded into quarters, its edges slightly crumpled from sweaty hands. There was no heading, no sender's address, just a sheet of school notebook paper. The slanted handwriting of a child not yet grown, but already finding a voice for things never allowed to be spoken aloud. I don't know where to start. At school, the teacher said we had to write letters to our parents, but I only wrote to one person. Mom told me Dad doesn't love me, but I think love doesn't have to be said much. Dad always stands in the same spot behind the fence, whether it's rain or shine, even when the guard won't let him in, even when Mom says Dad can't come near. I used to be angry at Dad because he was silent, but now I understand he's silent because he doesn't want me to feel uncomfortable. The grown-ups keep making me choose sides. The paper bore a smudge of ink, unclear if from tears or just raindrops on the day the boy stood outside the yard, watching the man holding a birthday cake, lighting candles, with an old lighter awkwardly blowing them out when he saw Mom come out. I'm not writing this letter to send to anyone. It's just, I need to tell myself that if I grow up and have children, I will never make them choose between their mother and father. Because I know standing between two people who once loved each other, but now look at each other like strangers, hurts a lot. The boy never mailed the letter. He didn't give it to a lawyer. Instead, he tucked it into a small wooden box under his pillow. But years later, the father received it, handed directly by his son, during a visit the boy made alone by bus, needing no one to accompany him. And then the man knew it was not the court, nor any verdict that decides the true winner. Only the memories of a child can serve as the final judgment. The 3-bedroom house, once the prize won in the divorce battle, now echoed only with the dragging sound of slippers each morning. The woman who once confidently left the courtroom, clutching the ruling in bold letters, full custody awarded, now sat listlessly in the kitchen, facing an unopened carton of milk. The boy no longer asked Mom, "Where's Dad?" like before. He didn't ask anymore, nor did he argue. He just quietly ate his meals, folded his blanket, studied, opened his laptop, and no one knew what he was looking at. Silence, not the bitterness or rebellion, not the yelling the mother once expected as signs of discontent, but cold. Cold enough to startle her. Once she quietly opened the door to his room at noon, thinking he was asleep. But he wasn't. He lay with his back turned, headphones on the screen showing a still image, an old photo of him and the man by a bicycle from when he was 6 years old, grinning with missing teeth, while the thin man held his shoulder tightly as if afraid to let go. She silently closed the door, and in that moment, she realized she was no longer the one who had won in court. She was the one being judged in the eyes of the very child she gave birth to. A court without papers, without lawyers, without judges, only memories, and a silence stretching like a life sentence with no pardon. He did not appear at any of the subsequent court hearings. He did not protest publicly. He did not file any appeals. He did not seek media attention or ask anyone for sympathy. The man once judged as financially unstable, lacking a suitable environment to raise a child, and not mature enough to be a full-time father, quietly lived on and waited. He knew he had made mistakes, leaving when his child had a high fever, and not knowing how to care for him, standing outside the classroom door, because he couldn't afford the sneakers his son wanted, trembling, as he wrote the first letter to his child, after the trial, unsure if it would ever be read. But there was one thing he never gave up: staying. Staying on holidays when he had no right to pick up his son, but still came to school just to see him from afar. Staying every birthday, even when not invited, quietly leaving a gift in the mailbox. Staying through 3 moves with the mother, always finding his son not to disturb, but to make sure he was never left behind. Once the boy waited for the bus at the end of the street, rain drenching his thin jacket. He stopped his car 50 meters away. No calls, no interruptions. Just watching, as if every slight shiver in his son's shoulder was a piece of wind tearing at his heart. The boy looked up, their eyes met. No words were spoken, but in that moment everything unspoken for 5 years became a silent promise. No rights were needed, just to be there when his child needed him. And that was enough. The boy had grown. no longer waiting for his mother's parent-teacher meetings, no longer crying when forbidden to see his father. But on a cold weekend afternoon, he came to the old house in the suburbs, once the court-ordered meeting place for exchanges. In his hand was a homemade birthday cake with the scrawled words, "For Dad." The man opened the door, stunned for a moment. His beard was graying, his eyes no longer sharp as before, but his smile remained unchanged. "You still remember this day?" he asked. The boy nodded without speaking. They sat on the doorstep. No court, no supervisors, no lawyers. Just a quiet space and two people once torn apart by things beyond their control. "I used to blame you for not fighting for me," the boy said. "I know," the father replied. "But now I understand. The one who doesn't fight is the one who doesn't want me to become a prize." The father said nothing, but gently placed his hand on his son's shoulder, the same way he used to do when seeing him off, never knowing when they would meet again. The sky was still that day, and for the first time in many years, not the winner of the custody battle, but the one who had lost his rights, finally heard those two words again, "Dad." There are relationships decided by documents, and there is love that needs no victory, only enough patience not to walk away. If you have ever been forced into silence during a separation, believe that silent love is never meaningless. Share this story if you know someone quietly walking the path of fatherhood or motherhood without rights, only love. And don't forget to follow the channel, because here we tell stories that don't need loud tears, but leave you choked up when no one is watching. See you again.